My name is Dowd Lambert, and I'm Senior Lecturer in Children's Literature at Simmons University, and I am an author, and I do a lot of work with kids and Storytime. What excited me about the Merge Children's Book campaign was the opportunity to work with diverse children and educators, with parents, with lots of adults who work with kids in order to engage them with excellent children's literature that could spark conversations about gender roles and other aspects of identity. Co-constructive approach to Storytime is an approach that centers the child and their responses to books, as opposed to asking the child to be an audience. So the model that I developed in association with the Carle Museum of Picture Book Art is called the whole book approach. And it's just one of many different kinds of co-constructive models where, as you're reading the book aloud, you're asking children questions and inviting them to make meaning of the books that you share together. I think that a co-constructive model like the whole book approach or like dialogic reading can really help foster conversations. And when I think about the goal of Merge, to think about the ways that we are raising boys to be healthy emotionally and to reject toxic masculinity, a lot of that work involves engaging not just boys, but girls, but all children in conversation about gender roles, about the messages that we receive, about masculinity, about femininity for that matter, and trying to deconstruct that. And that might seem like a lofty goal for Storytime, but I think picture books in particular invite children to make meaning of representations, including representations of gender. And so we can facilitate conversations that aren't top down. It's not the grown-up telling the child something. It's the grown-up engaging the child in conversation about gender, about safety, about anything that the story is helping us to engage with around masculinity, around gender roles. So ideally what this looks like is a conversation. I like to say that a co-constructive model like the whole book approach or any other model that gets kids talking, it should feel less like a performance and more like a discussion, so that the reader, the adult who is engaging a group of children or even just one child with a book, is asking questions, but is also really actively listening to what children bring to the shared reading transaction. So maybe a child has a response that isn't even prompted by a question. And what the adult's role to do is to hold space for how that child is making meaning and to invite other children to engage as well, so that it becomes an experience that's collaborative and that is about sharing ideas and providing evidence for those ideas and about grappling with questions. It's not all about coming to firm answers. It's about an exploration of ideas and an exchange of ideas that's all prompted by the art and the design and the story. So I like to think of a co-constructive model as democratizing story time, basically saying to children that their thoughts, their ideas matter. So that when we engage with a story time that invites children's responses, invites them to think about gender critically and to think about other aspects of identity, what we're doing is we're saying that we recognize that their lived experience is informing their experience of the story itself. And if we recognize that, I'll quote a theorist named Louise Rosenblatt, who says, books don't only happen to people, people also happen to books. And so if we recognize that people are happening to books, including the children at our story time, then what we're saying is they can all have diverse ideas and feelings about these stories that we share together. And therefore, that can ripple out into their experiences outside of Storytime, outside of classrooms, so that if they feel like their voice matters and they've felt heard, then they'll be more willing to take risks and stretch themselves as learners and as people interacting with each other in all kinds of settings. In many of the Healthy Boys trainings with Merge. And what excites me is that I see learning taking place right before my eyes. I see teachers who are experienced in reading with children, and they're getting new tools to add to their toolkit. We're not saying throw away everything you already do. We're saying add tools to what you're doing when you read with kids. Invite them to make meaning of the art and the design. Invite them to interrogate gender norms. Invite them to think about what the characters and the plots and the language and the art are all telling us about boyhood, about girlhood, about how we interact with one another. And I see that learning happening both in terms of the adult skill set and how they're going to engage Storytime, but also in terms of their own thinking about gender, their own thinking about masculinity, that they engage with the stories as readers themselves, not just as teachers. My hope for the future of the Merge for Equality children's book campaign is that it grows, that it meets more and more children and teachers and other caregivers where they are in their own thinking about gender and representation and masculinity, and that we're able to offer them more and more titles, titles by diverse authors and illustrators that really center experiences of people of color and Indigenous people. I hope that those book offerings will inspire people to have these conversations, not just at Storytime, but that they'll set a tone for conversations outside of Storytime as well.